Chapter 3. In the midst of these turbulent and disastrous scenes, the Confederates, whoever considered the king as unlawfully elected, and who imputed to his fatal elevation, direction, or approbation all the various ills under which the kingdom groaned from the Russian oppression, planned and executed one of the most daring enterprises of which modern history makes mention. I mean the attempt to assassinate the king. It is somewhat remarkable that, in an age so humanized, so free from the enormous and flagitious crimes common in barbarous centuries, so enlightened as is the present, this is the third attempt on a crowned head in my remembrance. Louis XV, Joseph III of Portugal, and Stanislaus Augustus all narrowly escaped assassination. As the attempt on his Polish Majesty was perhaps the most atrocious, and his escape certainly the most extraordinary and incredible of the three, I shall be as minute as possible in the enumeration of all the principal circumstances which led to and attended this remarkable event. A Polish nobleman named Pulaski, a general in the army of the Confederates, was the person who planned the atrocious enterprise, and the conspirators who carried it into execution were about 40 in number and were headed by three chiefs, Lukowski, Strawenski, and Kosinski. These three chiefs had been engaged and hired to that purpose by Pulaski, who in the town of Częstochowa in Great Poland obliged them to swear in the most solemn manner by placing their hands between his, either to deliver the king alive into his hands or, in case that was impossible, to put him to death. The three chiefs chose 37 persons to accompany them. On the 2nd of November, about a month after they had quitted Częstochowa, they obtained admission into Warsaw unsuspected or undiscovered by the following stratagem. They disguised themselves as peasants who came to sell hay, and artfully concealed pistols, arms, and clothes under the hay, which they brought in wagons, more effectively to escape detection. On Sunday night, the 3rd of September 1771, a few of these conspirators remained at the outskirts of the town, while the others repaired to the place of rendezvous, the Street of the Capuchins, where His Majesty was expected to pass around his usual hour of returning to the palace. The king had been visiting his uncle, Prince Czartoryski, the Chancellor of Lithuania, and was on his way back to the palace between 9 and 10 o'clock. He was in a coach, accompanied by at least 15 or 16 attendants, including an aide-de-camp in the carriage. Scarcely was he at a distance of 200 paces from Prince Czartoryski's palace when he was attacked by the conspirators, who commanded the coachman to stop on pain of instant death. They fired several shots into the carriage, one of which passed through the body of a hayduk, who endeavored to defend his master from the violence of the assassins. Almost all the other persons who accompanied His Majesty, including the aide-de-camp, abandoned him and attempted to conceal themselves by flight. The king had opened the door of his carriage with the intent of effecting his escape under the cover of night, which was extremely dark. He had even alighted when the assassins seized him by the hair, exclaiming with horrible curses, "We have thee now, thy hour is come." One of them discharged a pistol at him so close that he felt the heat of the flash, while another struck him across the head with a sabre which penetrated to the bone. They then grabbed His Majesty by the collar and, mounting on horseback, dragged him along the ground between their horses at full gallop for nearly 500 paces through the streets of Warsaw. All was confusion and disorder during this time at the palace, where the attendants who had deserted their master had spread the alarm. The foot guards ran immediately to the spot from whence the king had been conveyed, but they found only his hat all bloody and his bag. This increased their apprehensions for his life. The whole city was in an uproar. The affairs profited of the universal confusion, terror, and consternation to bear away their prize. Finding, however, that he was incapable of following them on foot, and that he had already almost lost his respiration from the violence with which they had dragged him, they set him on horseback, and then redoubled their speed for fear of being overtaken. When they came to the ditch which surrounds Warsaw, they obliged him to leap his horse over. In the attempt the horse fell twice, and at the second fall broke its leg. They then mounted His Majesty upon another, all covered as he was with dirt. The conspirators had no sooner crossed the ditch than they began to rifle the king, tearing off the order of the Black Eagle of Prussia which he wore round his neck, and the diamond cross hanging to it. He requested them to leave his handkerchief, which they consented to. His tablets escaped their rapacity. A great number of the assassins retired, after having thus plundered him, probably with intent to notify to their respective leaders the success of their enterprise and the king's arrival as a prisoner. Only 7 remained with him, of whom Coxe was the chief. The night was exceedingly dark. They were absolutely ignorant of the way, and as the horses could not keep their legs, they obliged His Majesty to follow them on foot, with only one shoe, the other being lost in the dirt. They continued to wander through the open meadows, without following any certain path, and without getting to any distance from Warsaw. They again mounted the king on horseback, 2 of them holding him on each side by the hand, and a third leading his horse by the bridle. In this manner they were proceeding, when they had taken the road which led to a village called Burakow, and warned them not to enter it, because there were some Russians stationed in that place who might probably attempt to rescue him plus. Finding himself, however, incapable of accompanying the assassins in the painful posture in which they held him, kept down on the saddle, he requested they give him another horse and a boot. This request they complied with, and continuing their progress through almost impassable lands without any road and ignorant of their way, they at length found themselves in the wood of Bielany, only a league distant from Warsaw. From the time they had passed the ditch, they repeatedly demanded of Coxe, their chief, if it was not yet time to put the king to death, and these demands were reiterated in proportion to the obstacles and difficulties they encountered. Meanwhile, the confusion and consternation increased at Warsaw. The guards were afraid to pursue the conspirators, lest the terror of being overtaken should prompt them to massacre the king, and on the other hand, by not pursuing them, they might give them time to escape with their prize, beyond the possibility of assistance. Several of the first nobility at length mounted on horseback, and following the track of the assassins, arrived at the place where His Majesty had passed the ditch. There they found his pelisse, which he had lost in the precipitation with which he was hurried away. It was bloody and pierced with holes made by the balls or sabres. This convinced them that he was no more. The king was still in the hands of the 7 remaining assassins, who advanced with him into the wood of Bielany, when they were suddenly alarmed by a Russian patrol or detachment. Instantly holding a council, 4 of them disappeared, leaving him with the other 3, who compelled him to walk on. Scarce a quarter of an hour after, a second Russian guard challenged them anew. 2 of the assassins then fled, and the king remained alone with Coxe the chief, both on foot. His Majesty, exhausted with all the fatigue he had undergone, implored his conductor to stop and suffer him to take a moment's repose. Coxe refused it, menacing him with his naked sabre, and at the same time informed him that beyond the wood they should find a carriage. They continued their walk till they came to the door of the convent of Bielany. Coxe appeared lost in thought, and so much agitated by his reflections that the king, perceiving his disorder, and observing that he wandered without knowing the road, said to him, "I see you are at a loss which way to proceed. Let me enter the convent of Bielany, and do you provide for your own safety?" "No," replied Coxe, "I have sworn." They proceeded till they came to Mariamont, a small palace belonging to the House of Saxony, not above half a league from Warsaw. Here Coxe betrayed some satisfaction at finding where he was, and the king still demanding an infant's repose, he consented at length. They sat down together on the ground, and the king employed these moments in endeavoring to soften his conductor and induce him to favor or permit his escape. His Majesty represented the atrocity of the crime he had committed in attempting to murder his sovereign, and the invalidity of an oath taken to perpetrate so heinous an action. Coxe lent attention to this discourse and began to betray some marks of remorse. "But," said he, "if I should consent and reconduct you to Warsaw, what will be the consequence? I shall be taken and executed." This reflection plunged him into new uncertainty and embarrassment. "I give you my word," answered His Majesty, "that you shall suffer no harm. But if you doubt my promise, escape while there is yet time. I can find my way to some place of security, and I will certainly direct your pursuers to take the contrary road to that which you have chosen. Kosinski could not any longer contain himself, but, throwing himself at the king's feet, implored forgiveness for the crime he had committed, and swore to protect him against every enemy, relying totally on his generosity for pardon and preservation. His Majesty reiterated to him his assurances of safety, judging, however, that it was prudent to gain some asylum without delay, and recollecting that there was a mill at some considerable distance, he immediately made towards it. Kosinski knocked, but in vain. No answer was given. He then broke a pane of glass in the window and entreated for shelter to a nobleman who had been plundered by robbers. The miller refused, supposing them to be banditti, and continued for more than half an hour to persist in his denial. At length the king approached and, speaking through the broken pane, endeavored to persuade him to admit them under his roof, adding, "If we were robbers, as you suppose, it would be very easy for us to break the whole window instead of one pane of glass." This argument prevailed. They at length opened the door and admitted His Majesty. He immediately wrote a note to General Coxe, colonel of the Foot Guards. It was literally as follows: "Par une espèce de miracle, je suis sauvé des mains des assassins. Je suis ici au petit moulin de Marimont. Venez au plus tôt me tirer d'ici. Je suis blessé, mais pas fort, ça." It was with the greatest difficulty, however, that the king could persuade anyone to carry this note to Warsaw, as the people of the mill imagined that he was a nobleman who had just been plundered by robbers and were afraid of falling in with the troop. Kosinski then offered to restore everything he had taken, but His Majesty left him all, except the blue ribbon of the White Eagle. When the messenger arrived with the note, the astonishment and joy were incredible. Coxe instantly rode to the mill, followed by a detachment of the guards. He met Kosinski at the door with his sabre drawn, who admitted him as soon as he knew him. The king had sunk into a sleep caused by his fatigue, and was stretched on the ground covered with the miller's cloak. Coxe immediately threw himself at His Majesty's feet, calling him his sovereign and kissing his hand. It is not easy to paint or describe the astonishment of the miller and his family, who instantly imitated Coxe's example by throwing themselves on their knees. The king returned to Warsaw in General Coxe's carriage and reached the palace about 5 in the morning. His wound was found not to be dangerous, and he soon recovered the bruises and injuries which he had suffered during this memorable night. So extraordinary an escape is scarce to be paralleled in history, and affords ample matter of wonder and surprise. Scarce could the nobility or people of Warsaw credit the evidence of their senses when they saw him return. Certainly neither the escape of the King of France from Damien, nor of the King of Portugal from the conspiracy of the Duke d'Aveiro, were equally amazing or improbable as that of the King of Poland. I have related it very minutely, and from authorities the highest and most incontestable. It is natural to inquire what has become of Kosinski, the man who saved His Majesty's life, and the other conspirators. He was born in the Palatinate of Krakow and of humble origins, having assumed the name of Kosinski, which is that of a noble family, to give himself credit. He had been created an officer in the troops of the Confederates under Pulaski. It would seem as if Kosinski began to entertain the idea of preserving the king's life from the time when Lukowski and Strawenski abandoned him, yet he had great struggles with himself before he could resolve on this conduct, after the solemn engagements into which he had entered. Even after he had conducted the king back to Warsaw, he expressed more than once his doubts about the propriety of what he had done, and some remorse for having deceived his employers. Lukowski and Strawenski were both taken, along with several of the other assassins. At His Majesty's peculiar request and entreaty, the Diet remitted the capital punishment of the inferior conspirators and condemned them to work for life on the fortifications of Kamieniec, where they now are. By his intercession likewise with the Diet, the horrible punishments and various modes of torture which the laws of Poland decree and inflict on regicides were mitigated, and both Lukowski and Strawenski were only simply beheaded. Kosinski was detained under a very strict confinement and obliged to give evidence against his 2 companions. A person of distinction, who saw them both die, has assured me that nothing could be more noble and manly than all Lukowski's conduct previous to his death. When he was carried to the place of execution, Although his body was almost extenuated by the severity of his confinement, diet and treatment, his spirit, unsubdued, raised him above the terrors of an infamous and public execution. He had not been permitted to shave his beard while in prison, and his dress was squalid to the greatest degree, yet none of these humiliations could depress his mind. With a grandeur of soul worthy of a better cause, but which it was impossible not to admire, he refused to see or embrace the traitor Kosinski. When conducted to the scene of execution, which was about a mile from Warsaw, he betrayed no emotions of terror or unmanly fear. He made a short harangue to the multitude assembled on the occasion, in which he by no means expressed any sorrow for his past conduct or contrition for his attempt on the king, which he probably regarded as meritorious and patriotic. His head was severed from his body. Strawenski was beheaded at the same time, but he neither harangued the people nor showed any signs of contrition. Pulaski, who commanded one of the many corps of Confederate Poles then in arms, and who was the great agent and promoter of the assassination, is still alive, though an outlaw and an exile. He is said, even by the Russians, his enemies, to possess military talents of a very superior nature, nor were they ever able to take him prisoner during the Civil War. To return to Kosinski, the man who saved the king's life. About a week after Lukowski and Strawenski's execution, he was sent by His Majesty out of Poland. He now resides at Semigalia in the Papal territories, where he enjoys an annual pension from the king. I am enabled to add to Mr. Wraxall's account the following circumstances. Upon General Coxe's arrival at the mill, the first question His Majesty asked was whether any of his attendants had suffered from the assassins, and upon being informed that one of the Haydukes was killed on the spot and another dangerously wounded, his mind, naturally feeling, now rendered more susceptible by his late danger, was greatly affected, and his joy at his own escape was considerably diminished. Upon his return to Warsaw, the streets through which he passed were illuminated with torches and crowded by an immense concourse of people who followed him to the palace, crying out incessantly, "The king is alive!" Upon his entering the palace, the doors were flung open, and persons of all ranks were admitted to approach his person and to felicitate him upon his escape. The scene, as I have been informed by several of the nobility who were present, was affecting beyond description. Everyone struggled to get near him to kiss his hand or even to touch his clothes. All were so transported with joy that they even loaded Kosinski with caresses and called him the savior of their king. His Majesty was so affected with these signs of zeal and affection that he expressed in the most feeling manner his strong sense of their loyalty and attachment, and declared it was the happiest hour of his whole life. In this moment of rapture, he forgot the dangers he had avoided, and as everyone seemed anxious to learn the circumstances of his escape, he would not suffer his wounds to be inspected or dressed before he had satisfied their impatience by relating the difficulties and dangers he had undergone. During the recital, a person unacquainted with the language might have discovered the various events of the story, from the changes of expression in the countenances of the bystanders, which displayed the most sudden alterations from terror to compassion, from compassion to astonishment, and from astonishment to rapture, while the universal silence was only broken by sighs and tears of joy. The king, having finished the account, again repeated his assurances of gratitude and affection for the unfeigned proofs they had given of their loyalty, and dismissed them by adding that he hoped he had been thus miraculously preserved by divine providence for no other purpose than to pursue with additional zeal the good of his country, which had ever been the great object of his attention. Being now left alone, His Majesty permitted the surgeons to examine the wound in his head. Upon cutting away the skin, it appeared that the bone was hurt but not dangerously. From the quantity of clotted blood, the operation of dressing was tedious and painful, and was submitted to by the king with great patience and magnanimity. The surgeons proposed at first to bleed him in the foot, but they laid aside this intention upon finding both his feet swollen considerably and covered with blisters and bruises. The family of the Hayduke, who had saved the king's life by the loss of his own, was amply provided for. His body was buried with great pomp, and His Majesty erected a handsome monument to his memory with an elegant inscription expressive of the man's fidelity and of his own gratitude. I saw the monument. It is a pyramid standing upon a sarcophagus with a Latin and Polish inscription. The former I copied, and it is as follows. Hic jacet Georgius Henricus Butzau, qui regem Stanislaum Augustum nefaris parricidarum, telis impetitum, die terceri novembris 1771, propri pectoris clipeo defendens, ceminatis ictibus confossus, gloriose occubui, fidelis subditi necem lugens, rex posuit hoce monumentum illius in laudem, alis exemplo.